The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Welcome, listeners. We are... Jason, are you hearing echo? Okay, I'm going to restart it. So Jason, please remove this first portion. So welcome, listeners. This is Divya, and so thrilled to be with you over here. What I want to share with you today is that we are in the holiday season and getting ready for 2022. And we are surrounded by uncertainties. So the key is that let's talk about having that mindset. Let's talk about having that resilience. And above all, I sincerely wish that there is joy and love and light in your family and with loved ones. And what I want to share is that in this season of holidays, in the season of giving, let it be a state of mind rather than just being limited to a few days a year. And one of the things I want to invite you to do is that if you have not got our copies, do get the copies of Expert to Influencer in Entrepreneur's Garden and any of our books, because the profits from our books partially are going to people impacted by different crises and pandemic. And another thing what I want to share with you is that remember to give 1 hour of your time every month to someone, whether it's your loved one or a neighbor or a charity or a person or any place or a nonprofit organization without any strings attached. Because think about it. Even if 100 million people in the US alone would give that 1 hour of time, we're talking 100 million hours every month. Yes, folks. So let's go into creating that state of mind rather than just limiting it to the holiday season. So I wish you and your loved ones the best. And let's get started with the show. So, folks, here's what we are going to do. We will be talking today about mindsets and how we can be human, how we can be handling tough things in a humanly way. So let's bring on our guest, Marissa.
Hi, Divya.
Welcome, Marissa.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. And I also just really want to acknowledge what a beautiful invitation that you just gave to everyone who's listening about paying that kindness forward. It just makes me really grateful to be here with you, to be sharing some of these discussion items on how we can inspire people to be more human and compassionate and kind and all the rest. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It definitely resonates with me because especially in today's day and time, it's so important that we expand our horizons. We expand our kindness because what's 1 hour in a month? It's nothing. So Marissa, it's great that you're doing it. I'm so excited to learn about your project and get to know about it. Yeah. So let's begin when you were a child. Do you recall a moment which stands out even today, or if there was a person who left a mark on you?
Yeah. Well, Divya, I mean, it would be hard for me to answer that question without invoking my own father, who was a major influence on my life in many ways. I mean, we had a close bond as father and daughter. But especially, I think that when I was growing up, my father was doing something a little bit different than at least other fathers around me were doing. So I grew up in New York City. My father was an attorney. He was actually vice president and general counsel for an international mining and minerals corporation. And his job was stressful. I mean, jobs are stressful today. His job was stressful in the milieu of where he was working back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, in the breadth of his career. But what I thought was weird then, but I find remarkable now, is that my father tuned into a different way of managing the stresses and the pressures of his life. And of course, it was a high pressure situation. You're the general counsel of a big international company. It was obviously a different work life than we are experiencing today. But I remember he used to work really long hours. I mean, that was the time when you obviously were in the office all the time. You were in the office on the weekends if you couldn't get things done. But he was always able to be remarkably present with me when he was off work. And what I found interesting about that, but also weird when I was growing up, was that one of the tools that he used for that was actually meditation and mindfulness. And this was back at a time when it was definitely not as much on the radar, especially in a business context, as it is today. And it was almost a little bit that he had to be a bit secretive about it. This wasn't something that he shared with his work colleagues, but it was something that I remember he would always get up before I did every single morning. And usually by the time I woke up in the morning, he was already sitting, doing his meditation, doing his mindfulness. And this was his way of getting himself present and focused and prepared for the day. And then at the end of the day, before he kind of finished the whole day, usually after he had kind of tucked me in and put me to bed, he would do the same thing. And it was a bit awkward for me growing up because I didn't have any other friends who I knew who were necessarily doing this. And he did try to expose me to it. But as a teenager, I just thought, no, that's Dad's weird thing. And I'm not so sure about it. But it was interesting because when I got to college, that was the first time that I really recognized, there may be something to this. Because I was feeling that stress, that pressure, that overwhelm, we were just talking before we started about, getting kids from university and, the pressures that kids feel today when they're in school, and how this simple tool actually can have such great benefits. So it's something that I've carried with me my whole life. What I thought was weird then, I actually think is remarkable now. And it's been a huge inspiration for me in terms of my leadership, in terms of my own ability to manage like that work-life balance, the work-life integration, because they're finding the balance in the imbalance. And I'm really grateful for my father for exposing me to that so early on.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Marissa, because so many times, we're like, oh gosh, I grew up with this, and was it good? Should I share it? Should I not sharing? Just kind of sharing a piece of yourself. As you mentioned that, mindfulness and meditation were definitely not mainstream back then. And even now, people are a little bit skeptical. And it's so interesting to me, just kind of sharing a quick story from my childhood. Like we had met for a summer reunion, and all of the kids were just kind of running around making so much noise. Whereas the adults, after having a heavy, heavy lunch, they're like, oh gosh, we wish these kids would be just quiet. Where do they get their energy from? So one of my cousins sat all of us down and had us just kind of breathing. Of course, we were not meditating. But at 5, 6 years old, I was exposed, and I didn't even know what a tool I had. And as I've grown, I, of course, love meditation and mindfulness. And there are studies after studies. It's like, it's not just woo-woo, but it is something that is backed by science all way through. And of course, people are skeptical of science and all that, folks. So here's what I'll tell you, listeners. Try it out for yourself. And if it works for you, use it. If not, not. So Marissa, tell us, what was your concentration in college and how was your life back then?
Well, I went to Sarah Lawrence College, which it's a non-traditional college for those of you who may not be familiar with it, in Bronxville, New York, so Westchester, New York. And so we weren't offered majors as such. Most colleges and universities in the United States, you have to have a major. But we did have to have a concentration of study, which I went into Sarah Lawrence a little bit open. I was very much into artistic endeavors at that time out of high school. And I was interested in a lot around the arts. But my area of concentration that I chose was actually in psychology, because one of the things that I was really curious about was the nature of human behavior and kind of understanding what makes us tick. And I don't know whether I feel as if part of it was inspired by growing up in New York. It's such a diverse kind of, it's a melting pot for so many different cultures, so many different types of people. And I had this real curiosity about the different people that I would encounter in everyday life, and really trying to get inside what it was like to experience life from a different perspective and a different point of view. So psychology was kind of my vehicle to get there and to start to understand the nature of the human brain, the nature of our personalities, the nature of habits and behaviors, and essentially what makes people tick. So that was my major concentration, was in psychology. And I took many different courses in college and then again at a graduate level. And it still fascinates me today.
Yeah, no, definitely. So sounds like, you moved into psychology, and how did your career trajectory move on from there?
Well, it wasn't a straight shot. I can definitely tell you that. When I graduated from college, I think I can remember being a senior and having some career counseling courses with other students. And I have a really clear memory that in one of these, I think they brought some experts in, and it was a bit of a panel discussion about, how to succeed when you graduate. And there was one person, and I wish I could say I could remember where she was from, who she was representing. But it was like this aha moment when she spoke, and she kind of said, right or wrong, I'm not even sure whether it was valuable advice, but it sparked me. She said, the reality is most of you aren't going to be taken too seriously until you have life experience. And by that, she may have meant, just go out and get an entry-level job and don't expect to be like a VP as your first position. But the way I took it was life experience. Well, okay, game on. I would like to have life experience. And I actually spent most of my 20s on this quest for life experience, this, whatever that meant. So how it started was I decided, well, as I mentioned, I grew up in New York City. My father had been originally from California. Growing up, I was exposed to both coasts. I didn't really have a great, clear sense of what the United States was about in the middle. And so I just took off, and I spent a few months driving around the country, really trying to get a lot of exposure to different people, different experiences, different parts of the country. And then I guess I might have sparked a little bit of wanderlust in that. And I went from there, and I kind of went further, and I actually spent some time living and working in India in my early 20s. It was actually also a time where I was able to use that spark of mindfulness and experience it in more of a group context. So it wasn't just an individual experience, because I was living and working at a school where they did meditation and mindfulness as part of their everyday, like getting everybody, the whole community together and focused and calm as we started the day. I also spent some time in Europe, but basically the long and the short of it is I got my life experience. And then the downside of that was then I came back to the US, and I was 30 by the time I came back to the US. And by the time I came back to the US and I started my quest for getting professional work, a lot of companies were saying, so this is really great that you've gone out and you've lived abroad and you've had these different experiences. What's your professional background exactly? So I kind of tripped myself up a little bit, but I caught up with myself in the end. So that was my first kind of foray into the professional world, was actually on this quest for life experience and living in many different cultures and places.
That is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Because, what you're sharing is that you're not only taking the learning, but you're implementing in your personal life. And that's such a huge impact, because the way I see it is that, it's information when you learn something. And then when you absorb it a little bit, it becomes knowledge. And it's so important to take that knowledge and make it the fabric of your life, because knowledge in itself does not help you grow. So when we talk about that, tell us, how did you grow and how did you develop that leadership mindset in different companies that you worked with?
Yeah. And it is through the kind of trial and error, fail, get up, try again. When early in my professional career, once I finished getting my life experience and I actually started working professionally in a couple of different situations, I was working at a startup consulting firm, professional services firm. And our specialization at that time was, and my specialization, and I should also say that after the life experience, I went back to school, I got my master's degree, again in psychology, and I went into a specialization in the psychology of workplace health, safety, and well-being. And I was doing a lot of travel again still, because as a new consultant, I was traveling all over the world. I think I hit 20 countries in the first 6 years, and was doing lots of training, lots of consulting, lots of active in the world experience with the company. But I had an opportunity to rise into a leadership. There was an opening that had been made inside the firm. And I was invited, or maybe I elected to submit myself for this position. And to be honest, I was still pretty green, right? I'd had my life experience. I had some professional experience, but I was still pretty green, and I was still learning on the job. And I went through the different cycles of having conversations and interviews with different people in the company. And I didn't get it. Actually, one of my close friends, who is also a colleague, a peer, obviously, she won the role. And when I went back and I asked, what was it? Why didn't I get this role? One of the things that among several different things that was shared with me, one of the core things was that I was too emotionally attached to it. And actually, in my emotional attachment to getting this role, I actually was holding it a little too tightly. I wasn't willing to have an open perspective as to where the role could go, with a curiosity rather than my fixed idea about what I thought the role should be. And it was a bit of a blow. I think I may have even been told that I was displaying low emotional intelligence by having such an emotional attachment to this fixed idea about the role. And yet it was also a great opportunity for me to stand back up after I felt like I was falling down and take another perspective on what it was that I was giving rather than what I felt I was getting from this role, this opportunity, in this company. So, that was an early learning that was quite painful, but actually quite liberating once I got beyond the initial pain of it. And I think from that point, I was able to it's not that I was no longer motivated. It wasn't that I wasn't interested or engaged to continue to move in my leadership journey, but I felt just a little bit less attached, if you will, or a little bit less emotional. And I think that there's a fine balance there, and between holding things really rigidly or allowing things to kind of expand as they need to expand. And you could relate this to like a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset type perspective. And I think I needed to learn that. I think I needed to learn that just wanting something and wanting something really, really hard wasn't always what was needed to get to where I wanted to go.
Very true. And here's the thing, life brings hurt, life brings surprises, and sometimes you can plan all you want and things will just still go south. Like, I'll share that in I don't even know now where we are at, which year. So 2020, for my business, I had planned out retreats for the whole year. We were full, feeling so great about that. Oh, this is going to be a phenomenal year. We have every single thing outlined and planned, and couldn't have been more happier and on a high, so to speak. And then come January, February, we had to pivot and we had to struggle. And that's where I'd love to hear more about your project, because you talk about doing things in a hard way. And one thing else also you share, right, that business kills the heart. So expand a bit about that and then share with us about your project.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be really clear, I don't think we're saying business kills the heart, because business is important, right? And all of us are
so
doing...
that's where I wanted to be clear,
I think the mantra that we talk about in our book, Compassionate Leadership, is busyness kills the heart. And where that comes from, the inspiration for that is actually the two Chinese characters that make up the word busy. And they'll put those two characters together, and the one character in isolation is killing, and the other character is heart. And so that's the inspiration for the mantra. But what great wisdom is that when so many of us are walking around, oftentimes with a badge of honor, talking about how busy we are, that in some ways that busyness can actually have some really negative effects. And there's science behind it. It's not just theoretical. I mean, we all know the connection between stress and well-being, and stress and our physical physical health. Right? That unmitigated, unmanaged stress, which comes from the busyness, the overwork, the overwhelm, when that's unmanaged, then we have some really poor downstream impacts. Now, that's not to say that we should just like let go of everything and be like, oh, well, I can't be busy because it's killing my heart. It's how we're approaching that. That's the key, and as you talked about, Divya, when you were talking about 2020, yeah, it was a roller coaster for so many companies. And pretty much every single company that we, a potential project partner with, also had a similar situation, whether or not you had already planned in-person events. I mean, that was true for us at Potential Project as well. We had to do the online pivot that lots of companies had to do. But I think not only did we learn from it, but one of the things that we have learned is the critical importance of human connection. That being able to be online has been great and good. And thank goodness, if we were going to have something like a pandemic that's going to prevent us from being in person, at least we have these great tools and resources to connect online. But we have lost a little bit of the human connection by not being able to be in person. And the busyness, I think, has come from being online almost 24/7, right? Because now everything is online. We're in back-to-back meetings all the time, and we're simply spent We're simply spent. And that's why in your introduction, again, that wish for people to have some moments of pause over the holidays for joy, to replenish. I would suggest people take an inventory of what are the activities that can really energize you in this period where hopefully most of us are slowing down, and not just doing more activities that deplete us if we can avoid it. And that will allow us to become a little bit more refreshed and recharged, and then more connected again when we come back together, even if it's still virtual in 2022.
Absolutely. And now I get it, because busyness can be just packing your time, or are you being productive? Because there is that difference. When you are being productive, it brings its special fulfillment, its satisfaction, when you're there that, okay, I'm planning out for the morning, I'm going to get this and this and this, depending on your priorities, of course. If you say that these are the times I'm estimating that it will take, and if you don't want to estimate time, folks, and it's again, what works for you. And if you set, even if it's a tiny goal, and if you get it done, you really feel good about yourself. So, Marissa, I can definitely relate to what you're sharing, is that putting that pause. Mm-hmm. And in the pause lies the power of choice as to what is it that you do. Very beautifully said.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you also mentioned about being direct. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so in our book, and again, maybe I should just say this book is based on research. I mean, it's not just our theories. And when I say I'm part of an authorship team among my other partners at Potential Project. And we've been on a journey for actually several years now, even pre-pandemic, where we've really had a curiosity about the leadership behaviors that today's top performing leaders need in order to excel. And in that research, and this is in partnership with Harvard Business Review, where we have assessed over 35,000 leaders globally. We've had a lot of one-on-one interviews with C-suite executives, and we've been able to get over 1 million data points on what leaders are doing well, and maybe some gaps in terms of what we call wise, compassionate leadership. And as part of that, we've constructed a simple model, which we call the wise, compassionate flywheel. And what we know about the flywheel, any flywheel, is to get the flywheel going, it might take some effort. And so for any one of us who are trying to build up and raise up our ability to be more wise and compassionate, and by wisdom, we simply just mean the ability to hold both understanding of the core priorities of the business, the strategic focus of the business, ensuring that people are performing at their best. And the compassion piece is simply the care piece, right? And putting those things together is what really accelerates the leadership potential in an organization. And so the direct is faster is part of that flywheel model that we have, where we talk about caring presence, the simple ability to be present no matter where you are, like what I described, what I noticed about my father growing up. Even though he was constantly doing things and busy, he still had a caring presence. And what we call caring courage, it's that feeling the fear and doing it anyway. It's recognizing that leadership is tough and it's hard, but the only way we can do it is to go through it. And then it is also about having that caring candor, which we call direct is faster. Instead of having those tough conversations that we may need to have and having them full of fluff and having them full of niceties, when we are just direct with people, they know and we know what this conversation needs to be about, and we can step out of our own way and just get to the juice of the matter. And I'll just end by saying the last piece of the flywheel is what we call caring transparency. So having that transparent conversation so everybody knows where they stand and there's no questions, and then we can move forward. And again, when you're moving through that model and it's winding up and the flywheel is happening, that's when people are having better trust in one another, more engagement, better psychological safety, and ultimately better performance. So
definitely some important nuggets over there. So Marissa, let me ask you this. So many times what happens is that the leadership team, especially in the light you mentioned that you have had so many data points and you have spoken to CEOs, that there are things, if they were shared or communicated with everyone in the company, it can cause panic. It may cause issues that could be avoided. So can you define your communication transparency perspective?
Yeah. So I think carrying transparency doesn't mean letting it all hang out, right? It doesn't mean just, sharing. Sometimes, we all have that voice in our head, and sometimes the voice in our head should not be the voice coming out of our mouth. And part of carrying transparency is also, we can't shortcut to carrying transparency without going through all of the other elements of the flywheel. So hopefully by the time that you get to carrying transparency and having that transparent conversation, people are already a bit primed, right? You've been present with them. You've been courageous with them. And when we as leaders are courageous and face the fear and do it anyway, then our people have that permission themselves to stand up, to speak their truth in a caring and courageous way. You've been direct. And so the transparency piece is really, what do we need to know in order to get to where we're trying to go? And again, it's not to say we should say everything all the time and have no filter, but it's also so many leaders, I think, shy away, at least at some point in their careers. And I can speak for myself earlier in my career, shy away from having the tough conversations out of fear of the impact it's going to have on someone else. And the caring transparency is saying, this is what you need to know. Because if I don't tell you, then I'm actually it's not kind, right? And sometimes we let people go on and we know we need to have a performance conversation with them, but we feel like, oh, maybe that would just hit them wrong. Like it's the wrong time of year. They have other things going on. And that's actually not kindness, because we're holding back on information that they could use to excel better.
So definitely there's a lot to unpack over here. And when we talk about tough conversations, let's check out what your thought might be. So many times what happens is that employees feel like, they have performed, they have done check, all of the above, and still they don't get promotion. And now they're sitting here, should I have that conversation with my boss or not? How is it going to be perceived? Am I going to impact my relationship? And then I have one more question for you. So if somebody, let's say one of our listeners was listening to it, how would they go about it?
How would they go about inviting that conversation?
Holding their boss accountable.
Yeah. And everything in the flywheel goes both ways, right? Just because we call it the leadership, compassionate leadership and wise compassion for leadership, that's not to say that it can't be used by any individual. And in fact, a lot of people, everybody has leadership potential. Everybody has leadership influence. So leadership is not just about leading down, it's about leading up. And so being able to exactly the same things, start with your own checking in with yourself. If I'm clear in my own self that I feel like I have given my best effort, and maybe a self-audit is a great place to start. And just really being real with yourself about how you're showing up. Are you actually checking all the boxes that you think you are? But then having the courage to invite that conversation with preparedness that you might get some of that candid feedback that could be hurtful. It could be harmful. The way I got that candid feedback when I was not promoted. So the invitation is to, I would say, self-audit first. Really check yourself. Are you as aligned as you think you are to the expectations of your role? Have the courage to have the conversation. And when you have that conversation, be open, be present, and be curious. It's an opportunity to kind of check your assumptions. You may have a story in your mind about why you're not getting promoted or what this leader thinks of you. But if you could let go a little bit, and if I could go back to what I shared earlier, I was holding things really tightly, but things started to open up for me when I let go and I was able to hold things more lightly. So that would be an invitation that I would have for your listeners.
Yeah, definitely nothing like doing self-audit and self-reflection, because so many times we are so caught up in our own heads that we are not able to see the forest for the trees, and always do the vice versa, seeing the trees for the forest. So either you can be so caught like in the big picture that, yes, this is what has happened with the company, this is the policies, and then just kind of applying to your one situation without figuring out like, does that policies really apply to all departments, to all people? Or you may be so caught up in the weeds that you're not able to see the bigger picture that, okay, this is feasible, not feasible. So that's one side of the story. And then on the other side of the story, there may be some great leaders who want to sustain their employees. And especially in today's day and age, when, as we have, multiple generations working,
Yes,
that loyalty for the company is not there anymore. And also the loyalty, so it goes both ways, right? The companies don't have as much loyalty to their employees, and employees don't have the loyalties to their companies, because they know that they could get laid off, and companies also know that folks can up and leave anytime, because that's the different priorities and different generations, as we have heard from the Great Resignation. So in a situation like that, how can employer, whether it's any position, whether you are a manager, director, VP, CEO, or board of directors talking to CEO, how can they have that conversation where they want to make sure that their employees are happy and they're doing the best they can to keep them for a long time? So basically around retention.
Yes, of course. And I don't have to let you know, obviously, it's hugely on the minds of many corporations today, seeing everything that we've seen in terms of what's been termed the Great Resignation. And so the great attrition that we're seeing can actually be pivoted into the great attraction. Like, how are we attracting people who want to stay, not just because they want a job, but because they want a career, or dare I even suggest a sense of family and belonging? Because honestly, and you talked about the generations, what people are looking for today in their jobs more than ever, and this is especially true for, some of the Gen Z and millennials, is a place where they feel like they belong, where work is meaningful. It's not just punching the clock. It's not just, having a standard 9 to 5, which completely does not even exist anymore. And what creates that? Human connection. And again, this is why we talk about the human aspect of both and leadership, as I mentioned earlier. It's, focused on priorities, high performance, but also focused on care. And I think leaders previously thought that was an either or. I could either be a caring leader, or I could be a leader focused on end results. And what we know is actually the leaders who have better employee satisfaction, better job satisfaction, better retention, lower rates of burnout. And this is quantifiable, right? So part of our research has demonstrated you have a huge increase in all of these factors when that both and leadership comes into play. And that's the wisdom and the compassion pulled together into one. And what is the core foundation of that? It's connection, connection, connection. How often, especially in this virtual world, are we genuinely reaching out to simply connect and allow people to feel like no matter where they are, what they're doing, that they feel like they belong. And we've lost a little bit of that sense of belonging, especially in the last 20 months. And that's why we're seeing so much in terms of people wanting to feel included. They want to feel like their voice is heard. They want to feel like they have a say, that they are being listened to, and there's space for them at the table.
Very powerful. So Marissa, if you were to be contacted, if anybody wanted to reach out, share with us your contact information, when's your book coming out, and anything else that you'd like to share about yourself and your project.
Yes, thank you, Divya. So as I mentioned, Compassionate Leadership, How to Do Hard Things in a Human Way is being published on January 18th, and you can pre-order already. Pre-order is available on Amazon and many online retailers. We'll have a physical book, we'll have an audio book, we'll have an e-reader version. So whatever your learning style is. It was co-authored along with my partners at Potential Project, Rasmus Hugar, Jacqueline Carter, and Moses Mohan. And you can reach any of us at www.potentialproject.com and find out more. We have tons of resources there. We have articles. We have our research studies. So would love to hear from any of your listeners.
Well, lovely. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time and the nuggets that you have shared with our audience.
Divya, it's been an absolute pleasure. I thank you. I thank your audience, and I'm appreciative of being able to be here with you today.
Absolutely. So, folks, it sounds like a wonderful book. Take a minute and check it out. And also, I want to wish you happy holidays. I want to wish you love and light and joy and a time well spent with your loved ones, not only during this holiday season, but throughout the coming year, and bringing in resilience, bringing in kindness and compassion for others, and just sharing 1 hour a month with someone else with no strings attached, no expectations. So thank you, listeners. Without you being in my family, the show would not be possible. And thank you, Jason, for all the technical support. Well, be wonderful and take care. Until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.